Even if there had been nothing else unusual about the Breton nobleman Gilles de Rais, his outstanding career as a soldier in the 100 Years' War and as a comrade in arms of Joan of Arc would have been enough to guarantee his place in history. Today, though, those achievements can only be seen in the shadow of the secret life he led, as the perpetrator of more than 100 gruesome child murders, a rampage which made him arguably the first serial killer in recorded history. Beast of extermination, terrible vampire who killed with pleasure, and enjoyed death even more than pain, according to Jules Michelet. The most artistic and the most exquisite, the most cruel and the most scoundrel of men, both tawny and a decadent ascete, according to the writer Joris Karl Huysmans, who attributed to him the pride of, in crimes, what a saint is worth in virtues. Absolute horror and morbid fascination surrounded the figure of Gilles de Rais, a great lord executed in Nantes on October the 26th, 1440, for having been guilty not only of perfidious heretical apostasy, as well only of the horrible evocation of demons, according to the sentence of the church court, but also of the assassination of at least 140 children, with whom he was convicted of having committed crimes against nature. Gilles de Rais was born in 1404 at the Château de Machecoul in Bois-Poitou. His father, Guy de Laval, inherited the lands of Joan le Sage. Without an heir, the Baroness designated Guy, her nephew, to inherit her property. In return, he promises always to keep the land in possession, and to keep the arms of the Rais family alive. This is how Guy de Laval becomes Guy de Rais. Married to Marie de Créon, Guy de Rais will keep his promise thanks to the birth of his son, Gilles de Rais. The young lad's taste for the arts, the theatre, literature, leads us to believe that he received a very good education, educated by the greatest masters in the field. The ease with which he goes into battle later also makes us come to the conclusion that he was educated in the art of war. His childhood seems happy and sweet, but fate steps in to change his course. Tragedy was about to strike. Both his parents died about 1415. His father, Guy de Laval, was killed in a gruesome hunting accident that de Rais may have witnessed, and his mother, Marie de Créon, died of an unknown cause. He was raised by his maternal grandfather, Jean de Créon. What did the boy experience in the grandfather's castle? One can only speculate. De Rais himself sees the germ of his own violence in his neglected upbringing. In my youth, he will later confess, I always had a sensitive nature, and could do whatever evil he wanted, for his pleasure and according to his will. As a young man, de Rais seems to have been impetuous and hot-headed, characteristics that translated well to the battlefield, where he was by all accounts a skilled and fearless fighter. When Joan of Arc appeared on the scene in 1429, he was assigned by the Dauphin, later Charles VII, to watch over her in battle. The two fought together in some of the major battles of her short career, including victory in the battle to end the siege of Orléans. On July 17th, the day of her coronation, it was de Rais who had the signal honour of carrying the holy ampulla from the abbey of Saint Remy in Rais, where it was kept, to the cathedral. In 1429, aged only 25, he was appointed to the position of Marshal of France, France's highest military distinction. After the arrest of Joan of Arc, Gilles de Rais retires to his lands, in the Château d'Étouffarges in Vendée. After living through the war, the Marshal indulges in his refined pleasures. His inheritance being one of the largest fortunes in the kingdom, de Rais spent it recklessly, paying enormous sums for decorations, servants, and a large military retinue, and commissioning music and works of literature. His sale of family lands to finance his extravagant lifestyle sparked a bitter fight with other members of his family, especially Joan de Craon, who pointedly left his sword and armour to Gilles' younger brother René when he died in 1432. He built up an extraordinary library, bringing together remarkable manuscripts. We can cite Suetonius or Valère Maxime. At the Château d'Étouffarges, Baron Gilles de Rais created a court worthy of a great sovereign. His guard is made up of more than 200 knights, squires, captains, who themselves have people to serve them. And all these people who live in this great fortress, that is the Château d'Étouffarges, do so at the expense of Gilles de Rais. In later years, de Rais seems to have been increasingly concerned with religion and his own salvation. In 1433 he financed the construction of a chapel for the bliss of his soul, which he called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, and which was staffed, horrifyingly in light of de Rais' crimes, with a boys' choir selected by de Rais himself. In order to be able to finance this lifestyle, de Rais surveys all he owns and makes fatal judgments. It's this magnetic road to ruin that leads Gilles de Rais eventually to horror and sadism. His lavish lifestyle forced the Marshal of France to put his land and all his possessions up for sale. Thus squandering all his fortune, Gilles de Rais borrows from the worst kind of people. His family, frightened to see this descent into hell, petitions the King of France, Charles VII, to intervene. The Marshal is then forbidden to sell his castle and land. An idea then haunts him. He must find his fortune. To do so, he turned to a science that was very fashionable at the time, alchemy and the transformation of metal into gold. He started to investigate the occult as a means to save his rapidly diminishing finances, employing a succession of alchemists and sorcerers. he intensified his interest in alchemy and other occult practices, which, however, produced no valuable results. In the 15th century, France is a land of death. English, French, and Burgundian knights kill each other in battles. Bandits plunder relentlessly. The Black Death consumes thousands in its path. But the most horrible place to find yourself in these dark times is a Breton town that will be known for no battlefield, no gangs, no plague epidemic. A town where just a single murderer is looking for victims. This murderer takes his victims day after day, year after year, and nobody seems to have the power to stop him. It was in 1426, when he was only 22 years old, that Gilles de Rais began his initial quest for gold. It is in his chateau that he will devote his days to alchemy, his nose in grimoires and manuscripts. Many accounts exist which show him as a lover of rare books, in particular those of Nicolas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. It must be stated that at that time, everything related to alchemy was prohibited. These scientific works are indecipherable for this simple baron. He then summons to his chateau alchemists who can do the unthinkable, turn metal into gold. Unfortunately, all their attempts fail, one after the other. Lead remains lead. The ruined baron ends up convincing himself that it is not possible to succeed in his quest for gold without the help of Satan. This is when de Rais turns irrevocably from human to monster. One night, a sorcerer arrived from Poitiers, Joan de la Riviere. They traveled together to a forest near the chateau to summon Satan. The night is moonless. De Rais grows irritated, listening to the sounds of wildlife in the darkness. His terrified companions huddle together, quivering and whispering at the slightest wind. Suddenly, a cry of anguish breaks the stillness. They hesitate, advance, feeling their way in the dark. They suddenly see, in a flash of light, La Riviera, exhausted, trembling and haggard, crouched near his lantern. He describes in a low voice that the devil appeared in the form of a leopard, but that he passed by him without even looking at him, without saying a single word. Many other sorcerers come and go, trying in vain to summon demons. One of them, named Dumesnil, demanded that the marshal sign a paper committing him to give the devil everything he wants, except his life and his soul. For all the wizards who surround the marshal, the solution was simple. Gilles de Rais must give up his soul or commit monstrous crimes. No way was the young marshal about to give up his own life. He prefers to indulge in murder than sell his soul to the devil. For his first victim, Baron Gilles de Rais attacks a little boy. During the trial, de Rais and his companions were unable to give his name and age, but the abuse they inflicted on him has been recounted. After they kidnapped him, they slit his throat, tore out his heart and eyes, cut off his fists and presented him to the devil as an offering. Par for the course, the latter does not show up. Satan's silence enrages the marshal, who does not despair though. On the contrary, this silence he interprets as a demand for more sacrifices. With the help of his band of twisted servants, pretty boys are lured into the castle. The accomplices approach poor boys, beggars, peasant children, and promise them that they can serve as pages or singers for the High Lord de Rais. They offer clothing, food, and escape from everyday misery. If they don't encounter any boys, they grab girls instead. Once the castle gate has closed behind the unsuspecting children, they are led into a specially prepared room. With grim precision, a witness described how de Rais sometimes sexually abused his victims, before the murder or afterwards,
when the body is still warm.
Sometimes at the precise moment when the wounds spurt blood and they die beneath him. De Rais and his vile cronies open the bodies, enjoying the sight of the steaming organs. The depraved baron would afterwards kiss the severed head, and let his helpers compare the head with those of the previous day, as to which was the most beautiful. At the end, the killer would fall into an exhausted sleep. The pools of blood would be cleaned up, and the tiny shattered bodies were thrown into dungeons under the castle. Later they burnt the corpses in a large fireplace, along with the clothing, piece by piece, so that it doesn't create telltale smoke, a horribly faithful servant testified. What seems certain is that Gilles de Rais murdered almost non-stop starting around 1432. These murders took place in the castles of Machecoul, Tiffauges and Champtos, as well as in any of the houses where he stayed while travelling. In Vannes, for example, one of the choir boys lures a 10-year-old to his death. The servant Poitou remembers this murder in particular, because he was supposed to hide the body in a latrine, and Poitou has to go down into the privy pit to press the body under the slime, and never was there any reprisals. The shoemaker André Barbe from Machecoul, for example, only dared to make a statement at the trial. Yes, Georges Le Barbier's son disappeared while picking apples, and Guillaume Houdon's child, and Jean Rousson's child, and Alexandre Chastillier's child. And he heard complaints about the loss of other children from the said Machecoul area, the report said. Neighbours had warned Barbe and his wife to watch their own child lest it be kidnapped. And when Barbe once told someone in a neighbouring town that he was from Machecoul, the stranger was shocked and told him that they eat children there. André Barbe went on to add that nobody dared talk about it, for fear of those in Gilles de Rais' chapel, and for fear of his other men. Those who would complain risked imprisonment or ill treatment. Such is the power of the Baron that he can kill children at will without fear of consequences. His aura of authority is so powerful that any complaints that arise are quickly quashed. No peasant would dare to try and challenge such an important man. What went on behind the walls of his bastion remained mysterious, as no one knew exactly what took place behind those thick stone walls. That not knowing intensified in the minds of the farmers and villagers. This reinforced the dark power of the murderous nobleman and made him seem invincible. In the end, de Rais placed the noose around his own neck, but it took years to tighten. He continued to live lavishly. In the village of Machecoul, he donated a chapel dedicated to the innocent children, so that each of the terrified citizens may think him innocent in the disappearances of their children. In 1437, he had to cede Machecoul Castle to his brother and cousin in a dispute over family ownership. 2 or 3 weeks before the handover, Henriette and Poitou say in almost identical statements that they were ordered to take the skeletons of about 40 children from the dungeon under the tower near the lower hall and burn them. Another helper testifies that he secretly let 2 noble ladies come to Machecoul so that they could satisfy their perverted curiosity by watching through a gap in the wall the horrible process of cleaning up the little dismembered bodies. De Rais remains for the time being unaccosted. When his brother René and his cousin take over the castle, they discover 2 children's skeletons in the dungeon, from victims that the servants forgot. They ask the castle servants to explain this. They pretend to be clueless, and so nothing more is asked. No one investigates further. Nevertheless, one has to assume that by 1437 at the latest, among France's knights, Gilles de Rais was suffering from the plague of a murderer, a man with whom it is better not to have anything to do with. He was shunned by all. In 1438 he had to cede the castle of Champtocé. Again, Poitou, Henriette and other helpers made dozens of children's skeletons disappear, as secretly as possible. They took them away in 3 big boxes and burned them. The following year, de Rais meets the charming, ruthless François Prelati, an Italian posing as an alchemist and devil charmer. De Rais attracts charlatans from afar, who, with their tricks, steal the last gold coins from him. And the most uninhibited of all is Monsieur Prelati, in his early 20s, educated, clever, and completely unscrupulous. The Baron falls for the charming stranger, possibly even making him his lover, seeing him as his personal saviour. Prelati, as we know today, was a con man. He created hellish noise in his chambers at night, pretending for the benefit of de Rais that there he endured terrifying battles with demons. But soon the Italian discovers only too quickly that something demonic is indeed going on around his new master, something much more devilish than all the tricks he uses. One evening the Baron presents him, in a glass, the severed hand and the torn-out heart of a child, that he might sacrifice the organs to Satan. It is not recorded what Prelati thought about this nightmarish episode, but he remains at the castle. In the end, it is neither infanticide nor devil worship that brought down Gilles de Rais, but rather an act of violence that was rather common for this era. On May the 15th, 1440, he stormed a church with 60 armed men and kidnapped the priest. The dispute was once again about the sale of a castle. However, the clergyman was of noble blood, and is also the brother of the treasurer of Duke John V of Brittany. In doing so, Gilles de Rais made powerful enemies. In addition to the Duke, he also angered Bishop Jean de Maletois of Nantes, to whose diocese the desecrated church belonged. Only now do the nobles use the knowledge about the murders that they had apparently kept secret for years. To hide such atrocities and let this vile fiend continue for so long made them just as evil as de Rais himself. To them this knowledge was just a powerful tool, without thought to the victims and their families. On July 29, 1440, Bishop Jean de Maletois published a letter in which he accused, among other things, that Gilles de Rais and certain accomplices cut the throats of boys, that he committed the sin of sodomy with these children, and that he committed terrible crimes invoking demons. Still, de Rais cannot control his depraved urges. Even after the accusatory letter from the bishop, he lures one last child to his lair. This was the son of Ionotte de Villeblanche, who disappeared around August the 15th, 1440. Soon afterwards, Gilles de Rais is taken into custody and appeared before 2 courts in Nantes, an ecclesiastical one under Bishop Jean de Maletois and an inquisitor, and a secular one under Pierre de l'Hôpital, the chief judge of Brittany. Tearful testimonies now follow dramatic confessions. Parents, relatives, neighbours give their accounts regarding the missing children. How many? Nobody can know for sure, not even the murderer himself. In one account, the court rounds the figure off at 100, 200, or even more victims. Another estimation puts the victim toll at 140. The killer is haughty and arrogant at first, but his bravado quickly folds when he is threatened with excommunication and, a few days later, torture as well. Humble, devout, and in tears, he now asks the judges for forgiveness. In a muffled voice, obscured by tears, he recounted his kidnappings of children, his hideous tactics, the murders. Obsessed with the vision of his victims, he described their agonies, their cries and their gasps. He also confessed that he had ripped out their hearts and tore out their eyes. He seemed to hear or see nothing around him. He continued to reel off the terrifying litany of his crimes. The Lord de Rais took pleasure in making his victims die slowly, in great pain. He often sexually abused them while cutting their throats or dismembering them, in streams of blood, and sometimes continued after their death, as long as there was any heat left in their bodies. The traces of these massacres continued to be found. In 1889, in Tiffauges, a doctor discovered an oubliette, and he brought back many small skulls and bones. The vile crimes of so many years are dealt with in just 12 days. On October the 25th, 1440, the secular judge sentenced Gilles de Rais to death. He was to be hanged until death and his body burned. Prelati and the other accomplices were condemned to be burned alive. Francois Prelati escaped from prison after a short time, but was sentenced again 5 years later after further scandals, and executed. On October the 26th, 1440, 3 gibbets, one of which was higher than the others, were set up in the meadow of Bis, and under each one of them was a stake. The crowd closely surrounded the place of execution. Gilles de Rais recited the prayers of the dying, while they made him climb on a high stool and passed the noose around his neck. The pyre was already lit. The 2 accomplices on their knees cried farewell to him, and acknowledged their forfeit of paradise. The executioner overturned the stool, and the body of this evil wretch was seen hanging and quickly enveloped in flames. The flames soon burned the rope on which the condemned was swinging, whose body fell back onto the brazier. Before the fire had devoured him, the women removed him, washed him, and placed him in a coffin which the monks carried. The procession proceeded, followed by the women, to the church of Notre Dame de Carme, where several young ladies had kept in remembrance of the marshal's repentance some fragments of the corpse. Well, my dear friends, I hope you have survived the Middle Ages' depravity and evilness. That is de Rais, Gilles de Rais. What a horrible tale. I did purposely miss out even more disturbing details about the tortures inflicted, etc. It was bad enough with what I found necessary to include to make sense of the story. You have to excuse me if my voice sounds a bit strange or if I sound a bit blocked up. Maybe I don't, which is great. But I am at the moment recovering from COVID. Yes, I came down with that dreaded lurgy, super flu or whatever you would want to call it. Was tested positive for it. Had a rough 3 days in bed. I'm slowly getting control of the situation again and starting to feel myself again. Yeah, yesterday poor Odette had a terrible shock. I had a circulatory collapse. and was totally out in a sitting up position at my computer, eyes wide open, mouth open, blacked out for 4 minutes, and she didn't know what to do. She'd actually thought I died. And she called the paramedics. I don't blame her. And they came and put hazmat suits on when they found out that I had COVID. But after lying down, the blood seemed to start circulating around my brain again. It's a weird thing, this COVID. I tell you, very strange. Very strange indeed. So yesterday I tried to work on this video to finish it off, and I couldn't do anything. I was still very ill, but I'm feeling much better today. Yeah, and by the time that you actually get to watch this video, I'm probably top fit again. So I'm always a bit ahead with the videos. So regarding Gilles de Rais, what do you think? Is he guilty, or was the story made up by the Catholic Church and the elite? And I have to ask that because there is a school of thought saying that very thing, and we'll get to that in a moment. As you know, organized religion, especially the Catholic Church, is most definitely not about spirituality. It's not about the salvation of your soul. It's about enriching the Catholic Church, making them wealthier, buying lots of land and having lots of valuable things, money, and above all, power. It's always been about power. So anything that they do is, for me, suspect. I'm not saying that Gilles de Rais is not guilty, but even if he was guilty, let's say he is, the Catholic Church and the elite hid that information for so long. They knew about it and hid it. So to them that wasn't shocking. That wasn't something really terrible. They just used it to make their land grab. So I'm very wary when it comes to the church and the elite. Let's have a look at a few things I found online regarding that very matter. Well, before I even go online, this is a newspaper article that I found from The Guardian, June 1992. We've already been through that in my story. So here we go. The case being made out in his favour for a rehabilitation tribunal, which convenue at Nantes on October the 26th, sounds like the grandfather of all miscarriages of justice, based on an uncorroborated confession. Because French law allows for an appeal for rehabilitation even in cases of capital punishment, a unique arbitration court of lawyers, writers, historians, and politicians was appointed to decide whether there was sufficient evidence to show that he might have been framed. The presiding judge, Henry Géramy, said the primary motive was to find out whether the history of France had been deliberately sullied by the original condemnation. The campaign was led by historian Gilbert Proteau, who provided much of the evidence to lawyers who argued for and against a rehabilitation hearing. The case for Gilles de Rais' innocence is very strong, Mr. Proteau said. No child's corpse was ever found at his castle in Tiffauges, and he appears to have confessed to escape excommunication. The accusations appear to be false charges made up by powerful rival lords to benefit from the confiscation of his lands. Local people gave their own verdict when Gilles de Rais was led out to the gallows. Instead of howling abuse, they wept and prayed for him. I mean, that doesn't sound like people who are happy to see a monster scattered to the four winds. It appears to me they were very upset, even in the story at the end there, where they carefully took his body down and washed it and took it away in a procession. This doesn't seem like the actions of people lauding the death of a vile criminal. It seems like they were very fond of him. Let's have a look further online now. So here is another article I found saying about a shrine that his family had built to his memory, and it had a reputation for helping mothers produce milk for breastfeeding for their children. Another French thing I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce there, was often visited by expectant mothers until its destruction during the French Revolution. So there we go, is another interesting thing where it wasn't found abhorrent. They were actually flocking to it. It would appear that they saw him as a hero. I mean, he fought alongside Joan of Arc. He brought victory to their land. Joan of Arc and Marshal de Rais. So it sort of lends a bit of suspicion to the official narrative on Gilles de Rais, doesn't it? Let's have a look a bit further. This site here is called www.gilderaiswasinnocent.co.uk, and there's not many of these sites. You can go and research yourself purely by using this title here. Gilles de Rais was innocent, or was Gilles de Rais innocent? So it says here, it is now widely accepted that the trial of Gilles de Rais was a miscarriage of justice. He was a great war hero on the French side. His judges were pro-English and had an interest in blackening his name, and possibly by association, that of Joan of Arc. His confession was obtained. You have to bear with me. My brain is still trying to get it together here after this COVID. His confession was obtained under threat of torture and also excommunication, which he dreaded. A close examination of the testimony of his associates, in particular that of Poitou and Henriette, reveals that they are almost identical and were clearly extracted by means of torture. Even the statements of outsiders alleging the disappearance of children mostly boil down to hearsay. The very few cases where named children have vanished can be traced back to the testimony of just 8 witnesses. There was no physical evidence to back up this testimony, not a body or even a fragment of bone. His judges also stood to gain from his death. In fact, Joan V, Duke of Brittany, who enabled his prosecution, disposed of his share of the loot before de Rais was even arrested. In France, the subject of his probable innocence is far more freely discussed than it is in the English-speaking world. In 1992, a Burgundian author named Gilbert Proto, who we've just heard his name before, was hired by the Breton Tourist Board to write a new biography. Proto was not quite the tame biographer that was wanted, and his book Gilles de Rais ou le Ghoul de Loup argued that Gilles de Rais was not guilty. Moreover, he summoned a special court to retry the case, which sensationally resulted in an acquittal. As of 1992, Gilles de Rais is an innocent man. And listen to this here. 2 years after the execution, the king granted letters of rehabilitation for that said Gilles, unduly and without cause, was condemned and put to death. What do you think, my dear viewers? What do you think? Well, on that note, I think I'll sign off. I don't want to overdo it. I'm going to go for a walk in the sunshine this afternoon. I would love to know your thoughts on this matter. Do you think he was guilty? Does anyone out there think he's not guilty? I would love to hear your sentiments on this subject matter. By the way, my mug, the Coloma Virginia Pearson mug, is ready now at Zazzle for sale. You can buy it there. You can also watch the video on YouTube where I discuss identifying Virginia Pearson as the Coloma image. Anyway, I'm gonna head off now. So take care. Thank you for watching. God bless. Bye bye.